I need some traction. You need some traction.
Hey everyone, Lloyd Lobo here, co-founder at Boast AI. We are on a mission to enable innovators to become successful by getting them access to government funding and the resources they need to succeed. Today's Traction webinar is brought to you by Boast AI Launch Academy in partnership with Growth Blazers, Founder Institute, Lazaridis Institute, and BCF Ventures. I'm super excited for today's session because we're on the cusp of maybe going back to the office, but a lot of people are accustomed to working remote. Like my company Boast, we've been remote first from the beginning. When I started the company, my co-founder was in Vancouver, I was in San Francisco. We're getting close to 100 people, all remote distributed. And I personally hate going to the office. I love being in a distributed world. So it's been a challenge for a lot of people working in a distributed world. And I was looking at articles and talking to friends, and they're seeing huge turnover because employees are not able to build great connection, and the communication and the culture, they don't know how to do it well. So I couldn't find a better speaker than Anique here, who's going to talk to us all about that. How do you build and scale distributed teams for hypergrowth? She's at Loom, which is the top video messaging product on the planet. And she's had an unconventional path to product and running product at Loom. Prior to Loom, she was VP product at Trip Actions, which is a unicorn, and she's helped scale the team 8x during a period of hypergrowth. And then she's had multiple roles at Uber in product partnerships and operations. And her unconventional path comes from running or working at Teach for America in Memphis, Tennessee for 5 years. So Anique is going to teach us all about building and scaling distributed teams for great success and hypergrowth. Welcome to Traction, Anique. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. I'm pumped. I'm excited to learn from you, and people are tuning in. So you have this impressive unconventional background. You were at Trip Actions, you were at Uber, great companies, and now at Loom, which is on a hypergrowth trajectory. Walk us through your career and how did you firstly go from Teach of America to product and then land at Loom?
Yeah. So I think, Teach for America was something I did right out of college, and it was just, I wanted to do it. It was really important to me. And I learned a ton. And when I was ready for something new, I think it was like a little bit of luck that I joined Uber. And Uber was just, in 2015 was just, kind of a playground for opportunity for people who wanted to own and were curious. So I originally started on the San Francisco operations team, like the Northern California operations team. And then I did a rotation in India to help run basically there were referral programs for drivers that were happening all across India. How could we nationalize that program? So that was the project I worked on in India. And then I came back and joined product operations, which is really where I got the taste for product, launching our hourly rentals in California with Get Around. And then I kind of was just off to the races. I had the bug. I was like, this is great. It's all of the passion and drive in building something new that was everything that was kind of Uber, but all of the collaboration and creativity of kind of more of my education background. And so I definitely had the bug to be a product manager, joined Trip Actions as their first product manager, and just, joined when we were about 40 and then scaled the entire product organization and design organization. And we built, a hub in San Francisco and a hub in Amsterdam. And then part of my challenge in managing my team in Amsterdam, both the design and product team, is sometimes my feedback could be a little harsh over Slack, right? All of my context and tone and intonation was just lost in text. And that's really where I began to find Loom to give kind of asynchronous design feedback that was more human and had more of my voiceover and still left room for that connection. And that's really how I ended up at Loom. And I love the building. I love the phase that Loom is at right now.
Awesome. And you know what, before we dive into product management at Loom, asynchronous distributed teams and all of that, what were the skills you think you needed to have in place to become a product manager? You worked for some great companies. And as I talk to people more and more, you're one of the most respected people in product today. what were the skills you had to acquire to become where you are? Because it's a very unconventional path, right? For me, it was easy. I'm an engineer, simple path into product and then founding companies. But this is unconventional. So I'm excited to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually thinking about it. I think from teaching, like I learned a whole lot about grit, right? The school I was at was 98% free and reduced lunch. I was like very young in my career and just like never giving up and just like you keep going. But I also think I learned a tremendous amount about people. And like I think the biggest thing that I took away is that everyone wants to be successful and people need different things. And I actually think like deeply understanding that makes it possible for you to work collaboratively with teams of people in different sectors. I think at Uber, I learned a ton about rigor and ownership and testing and experimentation, and ideas feel crazy, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? Like if you have conviction, you should go after it, even if other companies may think it's really hard. And I think at TripActions, Ariel taught me a ton of things. Ariel was the CEO at TripActions and is like an incredible product thinker. And that is to be aware of the market, right? And adjust. And you should be building products in a collaborative manner. Your customers should be partners. They shouldn't be customers. And I think at Loom, I think I'm just learning a ton about speed and simplicity. I don't know if I fully answered the question, but I feel like I'm always learning. And I think, Teach for America was very challenging, but it also like gave me such a great foundation for understanding how people work and how do you build relationships and how do you take on things that may feel nebulous and intimidating. And then I think, Uber was just like an incredible opportunity to learn from peers.
And then did you take any courses or programs as a part of it, or just sort of learned on the job?
I read books. I also like the product managers at Uber were like great to me. Like, I think sometimes out of like compassion, sometimes out of like laziness, they were like, oh yeah. Like you can go run that, go work on that. And so they gave me the space to learn. Engineers that I worked with at Uber also were like extraordinarily collaborative and taught me a ton.
That's awesome. And yeah, that's what I hear from people, right? You work at companies that have scaled products from 0 to billions and you learn a lot along the way. And that culture of mentorship is phenomenal. So what were some of the key learnings from your previous role that helped you find success, right? From teaching to Uber to TripActions and now Loom.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think from teaching, it is everyone wants to be successful. It's just a question of can you create the environment and systems in which to be successful, and that people want to, like, even at a kid's level, right? Like you want to know the why behind it. And as soon as like, that why are you learning something? Why are you working hard? Like a lot of creativity is unlocked from there, which I do think is, if you think about brainstorms, that's how every great brainstorm begins with in product, right? It's like the framing of the problem, the framing of the opportunity, that entirety, so much time being spent on the why. And I think from Uber, it is the impossible is possible, right? Like there is something to speed and relentlessness that I think Uber 2015, 2014, 2016 just had in spades. And I think from TripActions, fairly similar environment to Uber, but I think the number one thing that I walked away from there from a product sense is you have to be reactive to the market and you have to be flexible. And you need to partner with your customers, and you, like in a B2B2C product, you need to always remember that you need to be winning over the end customer, right? That end user, even if they are not the buyer, is the most important like user.
And today at Loom, you ended with simplicity here. Walk us through the product philosophy at Loom and how did you guys grow from 2 million users to 12 million since the pandemic? And of course, the simplicity of the product probably has a huge part to play in that.
Definitely. I mean, Loom is, well, I like to think of it as like bringing storytelling into the workplace, right? It's incredibly personal. It is asynchronous. It's also a new behavior, right? It is very different than text-based asynchronous communication. And so you need to be able to make the product easily accessible and easy to try. And so I think there is a ton of engineering, like complexity and genius that is all Vinay, our CTO, and like the incredible group of engineers at Loom, where, you know, I can record a video and have it instantaneously available to me, and it can be shared through like just a copy link, right? Just like that technology, like masking so much complexity is pretty incredible. And then I think, you know, Joe is pretty ruthless in terms of the beginning and the foundations of Loom, of like taking out every step. And then how, in a very simple manner, can you confirm that someone's done a good job, right? That they look great, that they sound great, that they're ready to go. And so I think that foundation of speed and simplicity has really like unlocked the growth of Loom, as we have, you know, really begun to teach a new behavior in the workplace.
How do you use asynchronous workflows to run your team? Like, walk us through like your whole team structure. Walk us through the structure of the team at Loom as a company. Is it all San Francisco based? Is it fairly distributed? How many people?
It's very distributed. The hours of 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. are like pretty busy. But no, we are a fully distributed team. About over half of the company is outside of California. So we definitely still have, you know, a fairly large team in California, but our dominant office is definitely our home offices. I mean, at the highest level, we basically say anything that could be an explanation, anything that is a complex walkthrough, anything that is an update is done asynchronously through a Loom. And our live meeting time is for discussion. And it's for the asking of questions, and it's really for like connection. The best compliment I received in the last 6 months was from one of my PMs, Jeannie, who is absolutely rad. She's like a wonderful like lifecycle growth PM. And she's been at a few different companies before joining Loom. And she was like, I have the highest job satisfaction, not because you're the world's best manager, but because like Loom, the product, has changed the way I work. Like as a product manager at both startups and larger companies, I was in meetings for 8 hours a day, and then was trying to do SQL and, you know, deep thinking work from like 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. And so not only did I like take a hit on personal life, it's not the best way for someone to work. And with kind of the balance between receiving some of that update and explanation and giving those updates and explanation, I have, you know, 5-6 hours of real heads down work time during the workday. And so we try to cultivate that as much as possible. So like I'm a big believer that PMs, EMs, designers should be running autonomous teams. Like it should be like a group of like autonomous villages with their own culture and their own rhythm. And, you know, Jude, who leads engineering, and I try to create systems that cultivate that. But like on a weekly basis, kind of how we're intersecting between Loom and synchronous meetings is on Sunday nights, I send an overview of the metrics and what we're going to talk about in the PM meeting. So by the time the PMs come to the team meeting, they already know what metrics are looking good, what metrics aren't looking so great. Do we have theories as to why? So that synchronous meeting time is much more discussion oriented and like sharing highlights from the weekend, right? Is for relationship time. I don't attend any design reviews where I'm not seeing the entirety of the design and the voiceover of the designer prior to having, you know, the product workshop. And I think that is such a gift for product managers and product leaders and eng leaders, because you're actually getting like the voiceover from the designer, and you're not spending, you know, 40 minutes in one alleyway of the design when there's so much more to discuss. Our data team is phenomenal and does all of their like dashboard readouts in Loom. And what's great is, you know, a month later, when you're preparing for a board meeting or you are trying to do like next quarter's planning, you don't need to have another meeting with the data scientists, because you have like all of their knowledge in a Loom that you can refer back to, and you can go rewatch to understand their voiceover of the data that you're looking at. So that's how we use Loom. Like at the simplest level, like Loom is for explanation, overviews, and in live synchronous meeting is really for discussion.
Definitely. And then when you implement something like this, like across a team right now, so like maybe walk us through like how big is your team, your specific product team, product, or rather product and engineering team, because lots of collaboration, right?
Yeah, we are between product, data, design, and eng. I don't know, we're probably about 80 people. So
Wow.
we're a big group.
Across time zones, across countries.
Yeah. I joke that it's okay that we take longer to present in all hands because we're like over half the company.
And so then what does the day-to-day look like? Do you guys do like daily stand-ups? Like what is that whole sort of communication flow? Like how do you guys come together synchronously to build free features and ship product?
So each team really does like come up with a rhythm that works for them. Very, very few people are doing daily stand-ups. Most of the time uh, you'll at the end of your workday, you'll like send out a Loom. At the beginning of your workday, you'll send out a quick Loom, just kind of giving an overview. And then the stand-up times is much more for really large projects that are across different product teams. But they're probably about twice a week. They're very rarely daily. But each product team does, and when I say product team, I mean product manager, design manager, engineering manager, engineers, like each pod does have a weekly meeting every week to just start the week.
That's awesome. Apart from Loom, what are some other tools you guys use at the company to stay in touch, to stay connected, to manage projects, manage product?
Yeah, I'm a power Google Sheets user. I would say we're big Google Sheets. We're definitely Slack plus Loom is really our sweet spot. So we do drop a lot of updates into Slack. One thing that I think is very dominant in the research of what was it like working remotely as an entire employee base and knowledge workers this upcoming last year is that people feel always on, and it's really hard to get deep work time. I think that's true for our internal surveys, but it's also like true if you read the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, right? Like it's all over the news. People feel like they are always on and things are always buzzing. So even in Slack, we try to be pretty clear that this is like a P0 comment, a P1 comment, P4, just so you have the opportunity to get deep work done.
Do you use anything specific for like feature prioritization, product prioritization, like I don't know, Jira, GitHub?
Oh
Notion,
yeah. We use
Asana?
Jira, Linear. The marketing team at Loom uses a ton of Asana. But yeah, we largely use Jira, but a few of our teams are using Linear as well, and they've been huge fans of that. GitHub, obviously, we use a healthy stack, but we're trying not to have tool explosion because I think that also can lead to another type of anxiety, which is where's my source of truth?
Yeah.
So we try to stick to like dominant source of truth is Notion, Loom, and Slack.
Notion, Loom, and Slack. Awesome. And when you say Loom is the source of truth, what type of data sits in there? Because you said distributed messaging tool, one of the best messaging tools on the planet. But then when you say source of truth, walk us through.
When I say source of truth, it's like, where do I go to get my information? So, Loom has transcriptions, right, that you can refer back to. We have call to action. So if I get, a Loom overview with like a design walkthrough, we'll also attach, what the Figma file is and what the overview of the product is. And so it's all it links into that hub.
Definitely. There's a lot of confusion around asynchronous communication. Maybe define for us what asynchronous communication means for you, or like the global definition, and then what it means at Loom, and how people can adapt that to their companies.
Yeah. I mean, asynchronous communication is communication that is happening that doesn't require both people to be live at once. So Zoom, synchronous communication. This webinar, synchronous communication. What you post on YouTube, asynchronous communication, right? So that's generally the definition we work off of.
What are some sort of pitfalls you've seen? Because I'm seeing companies, I've interviewed so many hundreds of founders here. They complain a lot, and they complain that their employees are having a hard time adapting to asynchronous communication. They can't wait for the office things to go back to the office. But I personally feel like this is you're hanging on to a dying trend. And what are some mistakes you've seen companies make that can be fixed or nipped in the bud?
I think the biggest mistake is thinking that it doesn't require intentionality or a cultural shift. Like no piece of product will ever solve the entirety of a cultural problem. So being, valuing asynchronous work time requires preparation. It requires an understanding and, like rules of engagement as to what type of communication at your company is going to be asynchronous versus synchronous. It probably means encouraging things like, does this meeting need to happen? Can you just send out a Loom? Or can you just send out a Word document? Like, does this need to be an hour? Or could it be 30 minutes if we sent out some type of preparation beforehand? So I would say like the biggest one is not acknowledging that it is in fact a cultural shift. And this is why we're making that cultural shift. And then rules of engagement to make that asynchronous and synchronous really successful, right? I've talked a lot about the product at Loom, but there's also like very thoughtful people practices that go with the product around, hey, probably twice a year, Loommates are going to get together in person. It is going to be by function, but also, the entirety of the company. And those are really thoughtful, like people practices that we're putting in place. We all crave human connection, right? I'm so happy that you're on video versus having your video off. Why? Because it makes me feel comfortable. I can see your face. I can see your emotions. Like there are even times where I'm like, oh, is he confused? Right? I'm reading you and I want that connection. And so I think a successful synchronous and asynchronous company requires absolutely like thoughtful technology choices, but equally thoughtful people practices.
What are those people practices that Loom and in your past companies that you guys have been deliberate in putting in place, like maybe top 3 or 5? Because I agree with you. If people don't feel a sense of connection, they don't feel autonomy, they're not having a sense of purpose, they're not recognized, they're going to get checked out. And sometimes you feel like I'm doing the same thing, getting paid the same amount in the same place. I may as well change one variable for the sake of change. And that is going to a different place.
I mean, the number one thing I've learned from Joe and Vinay, and I have to be honest, like coming to Loom, when I saw it, I was like, whoa, like we're being really transparent.
Because Trip Actions is not a very distributed company, right?
It is distributed globally, but it is around hubs. So it's like have an office in London, office in Amsterdam, office in New York, office in San Francisco. So you have a lot of distributed workforce challenges, right? Which was my kind of entry point into Loom, was managing this product and design team in Amsterdam. Digital office is not the dominant office, right? Like you have these hubs. I think the number one thing that I learned from Joe and Vinay in joining Loom is that in a fully distributed workforce, you need to put a ton of intentionality around how transparent you are and how often. Because when you are transparent, it obviously like builds moments of intimacy between founders and employees, managers and employees. But also when you're not together in an office, you have a lot more time to like think in isolation, right? And so if you're not giving people the information they need or information they're wondering about or insight into how you're thinking, there can be a lack of closeness. And so I think one of Joe and Vinay's like core tenets for their leadership and in the culture they're building at Loom is really focused on transparency. And I think the Loom product really helps with that, right? Like Joe will record a Loom for me and I'm like, I'm going to share this with my product team, right? And so I just grab it and I grab that context and I share it with the product team, and it has all of his voiceover and all of his emotions. So I think the first would be transparency. The second one I already talked a little bit about, but kind of like rules of engagement between what is synchronous and asynchronous, I think is really important. I think the third one is putting energy to at least twice a year, once every quarter, having opportunities for people to meet in person. I think the other one that we're starting to explore within Loom that I think is really interesting is like, what is if I live in Boulder and there's 3 other people at Boulder, what is like the flexible travel and entertainment policy that enables, us to just go out to dinner and not worry about it, but it's part of the planning process of the people team that like, we want to encourage that social connection outside of work as well.
Definitely. One of the key things you pointed out is transparency, but how much transparency is too little and how much is too much?
I think too often people are probably too little, right? It's something's tough or something's hard and you want to shield your team or like the broader company from that. When the reality is, at least in a startup setting, everyone came to build this company with you, right? Like we all opted in day one. I think in terms of too much, I think as like leaders and as coworkers and peers, you want to feel like your counterpart is trustworthy and has perspective. I think if you're not at the point as to having perspective on an opportunity or on a challenge or on decision, you're not ready to be really transparent about that topic. You need like a little more personal digesting time.
Definitely. And what I often find is that if your team members find out about something through someone else versus you, maybe through press or some other source, like if you're putting a job description in somebody else's team, that's like sort of bare minimum, right? Like you're like not even communicating. But
Yeah,
too much
shouldn't go up before everyone knows they're going up.
Awesome. Walk us through what is the asynchronous first communication model?
Oh, I mean, the like synchronous first communication model is, at least at Loom, is like, could this be a video message first? Right? Like, is there anything we're discussing here is probably the first question. And if the answer is no, then we're just going to send a video message. We're just going to send a Loom. If the answer is yes, there will be a discussion required, what portion of that discussion needs to be synchronous, right? Could the first 50% be done asynchronously through Loom, through Slack, through a Notion doc? And then like, what can we preserve for just the discussion time?
Do you see anything that's broken? I mean, like everything seems like it's going great. You come to this company, you're scaling, hypergrowth, asynchronous first. What are some things that you look back and you think like, these things really broke, or we should have watched out for those things?
I mean, I think the biggest mistake that I, for some reason, have to learn like at least once a month, like I just don't know why I like can't get it through my thick skull. It's probably like one of two things. I think anytime, and this is more on the product side, I love shipping products. I like teams moving fast. I love startups for a reason. Like it just gets me going. Like I played like soccer and rugby, like during all of my childhood and college. And so there's just like this team aspect that I really love about product. But I think the number one thing that you constantly need to be iterating on is like, how much time did you spend on upfront on the problem definition and why you're solving it, right? That like initial stage can sometimes feel extremely expensive, but always worthwhile. Right? The like, what are you solving? Why are you solving it? How do you want to solve it? That planning portion, I think, you can spend 50% of your time to go for, it can almost be split 50% there and 50% on execution. So I think I'm constantly gauging whether we're spending enough time there. And there's definitely been certain pushes where I'm like, we didn't spend enough time on this. So I think that's like the biggest risk for product teams in startups, which is, are you getting clarity on the approach and how are you balancing that against like the speed and the needs of the business? So that would definitely be on the product side. On the cultural side, I think, and this is just more my reflection for myself, I think that I attempt to be very intentional around transparency with my product team. But I think, in a distributed company, you also need to think about, okay, I, the leader, how am I also transparent with my cross-functional stakeholders? Because we're not going to have that same type of in-person meeting time or regular, 90-minute biweekly meeting. And so I think that's something that I need to be increasingly intentional on, is like, as I think about changes, yes, I need to be focused on my actual product team, but that product team expands to design, engineering, data.
What does your reporting structure look like right now? Because you're head of product there. So you said massive organization. Like, how is the individual team structured? Is it like an EPOD structure? Is it structured around P&L lines? Like, how is your team structured?
Yeah, we're structured largely in 4 pillars. So we have our core creation experience. So that is recording in sharing and viewing a Loom. So if anyone on the call has used the product, it's like leaving comments, reactions, how do I record my face in the screen? We're launching virtual backgrounds, right? That entirety of the creation flow. The next one is what we call our lifecycle team. So it is largely, how are we onboarding users? Do they understand what the product is? What are like both the product touch points they get and the emails they get in the entirety of the flow? The third pillar is our platform team. So it is both integrations as well as the Loom SDK. And so the Loom SDK is the ability to both record and embed a Loom in your product, right? Video, you probably know this, right? Like video is very expensive, complex technology. So how can we build like a unit that you can partner with us and build your own experience around? So all of that context exists within your product. And then the fourth pillar is company. So far more of our enterprise centered features as well as our team collaboration features. So both product design and engineering are kind of all oriented around these four pillars.
And then, you talked about one-on-ones, like what is the ideal reporting structure, I guess, team size wise? How many direct reports do you have?
I only have 6.
And do you find that efficient as the best way to sort of, I guess, be involved in people's careers? And what are those roles anyway, the 6 people reporting to you?
So 3 of the 4 pillars have like group PMs that lead those pillars. And then the lifecycle pillar, I manage both of the PMs in that pillar. I think 6 to 8 is a really healthy point. I think anything beyond 8, there's either a tax on the team or a tax on you. Hopefully it's a tax on you and not a tax on the team, but the tax on you eventually becomes the tax on the team. So I think that's a sweet spot.
Awesome. And that is, I find that too, if you can't do regular one-on-ones where you're actually empathizing and not just hearing, but you're listening deeply and understanding, it's very hard to be sort of involved in people's growth and career and provide genuine feedback. So that number aligns.
That resonates with me. I think it's something that I definitely try to monitor in myself is like whether I'm getting energized in one-on-ones, because normally when I'm getting energized in one-on-ones, it's because I'm like fully present and the structure is still serving us. If I'm like exhausted at the end of the day of the one-on-ones or the end of the week, there's probably something going on in the structure or my focus, because I love my team,
Definitely. Awesome. And then sort of leadership philosophy, what type of leadership philosophy do you recommend in asynchronous communications and teams that are distributed? Because I find like there are some leaders that just micromanage the hell out of people and they want like regular check-ins and all of this. What sort of leadership structure do you find the best teams you've led thrive in?
So I can only speak for myself. There's so many different forms of leadership. And like, even within my PM team, there's like 5 different brands of leadership. So I'll only speak to me. My style as a manager is I'm going to give a ton of trust up front and then like keep giving you trust, or I'll like wind it back. I also find when I am feeling like anxious or I'm like sensing myself micromanaging, it's generally because I don't have the information I need to be confident. And so in that case, I think there's feedback to be given around managing up and aligning on a system around managing up. So I think that is like super important. I also am like realistic with myself, which is like, I'm probably more in the camp of like tough and fair, but with really tight relationships is probably my style of management. And though I respect so many other like different styles, I'm probably not at this point, I'm probably not going to radically change. And so I should just go with my strengths. So that's my style and that's what works for me. That's generally kind of my thoughts around it. I think the one thing that I try to do for myself every weekend is like, what do we need to win on? And like over the course of the quarter, and of those 3 key objectives, like, are we on track for winning or not? And what needs to change in the week to get us back on track? And I try to send those looms out like on Sunday or Monday morning. So for my like leads on the pillar, we're aligned.
Definitely. This is great advice. What are some challenges though, when you've seen with like sort of trust, communication, and engagement that are, that end up happening right in these asynchronous teams? I guess building trust in remote is easier. Building trust in co-located teams, building trust in co-located teams is easier than remote sometimes. And how do you do that with asynchronous work?
Something that I'm actively trying to work on, and so I'm not going to pretend that I'm an A, like I'm just like actively trying to work on it because I think it is super important, is for me and where I am with my team, it's like I feel so lucky to have every member of my team. Like I just think they are doing a really good job. Everyone has areas of growth, but like their points of success, I think at this point, like often are outweighing those areas of growth. And I think specifically in a remote setting, absolutely you need to be transparent and to the point on what's not going well. But I think even more than that, you need to be transparent about what is going well. And I think for myself, that's actually something that I don't do enough. And this weekend I was with, a couple of people that manage pretty large teams, and they actually all three of them said the same thing. They're like, I need to be giving in the remote setting of just like managing my team fully remotely. It's very clear to me that I need to be much more conscious about this was great. Like this release went great. That presentation was excellent because I think in a remote setting, and especially with people that are younger in their careers, you can feel anxious, right? And if you're not hearing anything, it's probably good news. But if you're not hearing anything, like everyone can get in their head. And so accepting that as like part of the reality and being proactive in, hey, this is going really well. I think is really important in the remote setting. The best gift my VP of Eng gave me my first 2 weeks was he sent me a Loom, and it was very simple. He was like, so excited you're here. Shit's going better now that you're here. Like it was like very, very simple. He didn't say the S word. That's, I don't remember what word he said. Jude wouldn't do that. But that affirmation was so important, and it made us a team, right? It was like, I'm rooting for you. And I think that, building that intimacy in a remote setting, again, it requires a lot of intentionality.
Definitely. And one of the things that often get missed is we talk a lot about criticizing. There's a lot of criticism for failures or missteps, but there's not enough recognition in companies. There's never enough recognition. And this is really good, right? When people are constantly sort of recognizing you or pumping you up, you feel good. You feel like, I want to wake up. Everyone wants to be complimented.
Yeah.
And this is amazing. I tell our team, our leaders all the time, like, just give more recognition. It's not the 5% that went wrong. Compliment the 95%.
The one other thing I would say on that is that it's like what I think, especially in the product world, like product design engineering world, there's like exceptional celebration for great launches. But there probably isn't enough celebration for how people are operating in terms of like ownership, commitment, curiosity, truth seeking, right? Like all of those mannerisms that make a company great. And so that's something I've been trying to challenge myself on, is like, I have a woman on my team named Rachel who, like, if she thinks like something is wrong or we are missing a beat, she will like go in and find the data to be like, we're not investing here. We need to be investing here. Or like, I think this feature needs to be part of the MVP. And that's like the exact type of attribute you want at a startup. And so I think like complementing those attributes and those characteristics is super important.
Let's take some questions here. But Bill says, when will the book come out with Anique's learnings about practices of building a distributed team? So you should be writing a book soon.
I don't think so. I think I should be building a product. But thank you.
Awesome. So in the beginning, you said there were some books that you read a lot that were helpful. What were they as you look back?
I'm trying to look. I mean, the most recent one I read was What You Do Is Who You Are, which is Ben Horowitz's most recent book. There was a couple of just like straight like product management, agile, like the technical piece of product management that, I bought the kind of like the best ones on Amazon. I do encourage a lot of my team to take the Reforge program on growth, because I think, it gives a common language around it. But if it's helpful, I can follow up with like the exact books I grabbed when I first transitioned into product.
Somebody says, could you please write the book she referred to? So they want you to write a book. That's good. People are loving the session. That makes me feel. Take the Reforge program on growth. I'm typing it out.
Yep.
Sorry, go on, Anique.
No, but I mean, I think, it's the hard thing about hard things, like lean design. They're all great. The blitz scaling handbook, or I don't think it's called the blitz scaling handbook. It's just called blitz scaling. I read that at the beginning around Trip Action Series B, and that was super helpful. I just like listened to it on tape as I was running, because the thing with like high growth startups is you think, oh, and then there's the high growth handbook. That's pretty good too. I mean, there's so many, but the thing that's happening that I think happens when you are like in it, in a high growth startup, is you think that like everything is unique to you, when like there are so many people that are so much smarter and have seen way gnarlier problem sets, that I think it's really helpful to like listen to their stories or read the books.
Awesome. There's another couple of questions here. How much of a curve is there for people to adapt to like this asynchronous or recordings? Like, what have you seen? Were there issues with shy people not wanting to hear their own voice?
That's a good question. I think most people find a rhythm that they feel comfortable with. I think your first 3 looms can feel, and it's actually funny, we see this in the data, there's something about 3 recordings that's really important. I think at the beginning you feel a bit more nervous. You may attempt to like edit your looms, but like now I never edit them, right? It's like I had perspective and I share it, and I think it becomes a lot more comfortable. I think it's similar to when you got your first job. And I remember I used to agonize over the emails I would write. I mean, I like wouldn't trust Google's like spell check. So I put it in Grammarly spelled, like I was just like so dedicated to getting the wording exactly right in an email. And then fast forward 5 years and you're just like pumping them out, right? Only very like all company emails are you really rereading a bunch of times. And so I think it's a very similar learning curve with video in the workplace.
Awesome. You talked about life cycle versus pillar PMs. Could we elaborate on that? And at what point are they applicable within a company?
Yeah, so let me be more specific. So there are 4 pillars within Loom, and I would say 3 are much more of your traditional core feature pillars. And what I'm like, they're building, net new products, net new features. The lifecycle PMs are largely focused on experimentation, activation, and how do you grow the number of signups or grow how many people within a company are using Loom. And they kind of look at the onboarding experience very holistically as to, hey, how are people learning about Loom? When they learn about Loom, what type of in-product messaging education do they receive? What do they receive on email? What is working about our onboarding flow? What are people learning versus not learning? After they after they record their first Loom, how do we try to encourage them to try a second and a third? How do we celebrate those moments, right? When you get someone to watch your first Loom, like, is that a celebratory moment? So that's kind of the difference of lifecycle versus the core pillars. Lifecycle is much more about like cultivating those early users of Loom, and understanding how we make people successful and kind of scaling this idea of asynchronous video communication.
Can you share currently how you seamlessly set up work sprints with remote teams? What are some key things to watch out for, mishaps, etc.?
So the only sprints I'm planning are for the quarterly level. The PMs focus on the weekly and bi-weekly sprints. It's like that is like their area with their eng managers to manage. In terms of quarterly planning, what I generally do is I try to write the priorities and obviously align with the co-founders, and then get feedback from the PMs. And then I'm a huge template person. So every PM is planning the same for quarterly. So this is what I'd like to see in terms of your OKRs and like the data that informed the OKRs. This is the template for your refresh strategy. And this is the template for the roadmap. So at the quarterly level, I see my role as defining what we're doing and why, building investment around that, and then creating systems that require clarity of thought on what we're doing and why we're doing it and how they support those broader company priorities.
I'm sharing some other resources here, but um, in terms of tools, we started the conversation with the different kinds of tools you use at Loom, right? What are your top three? I know you said Notion, Loom, and Google Docs, but are those your top three, or you brought up a number of tools?
I'm like Looms and Google Sheets, period. Like
Looms and Google Sheets.
Looms and Google Sheets are like my jam, and then Slack as well, obviously for like ongoing chat. I was with friends this weekend. They were like, "You send us Google Sheets for vacation." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a product manager. Like, I love my Google Sheets." So I keep it pretty simple.
Is there a template on how to set up sort of G Sheets and Loom, or Notion and Loom to run as a team? If you have those resources, we can drop it here.
Yeah, I would need to make it into a template because right now it's a very active document that's called product roadmap. But yes, I can share a template. It's pretty straightforward.
Awesome. And then Nia says here, how Loom uses Loom to make Loom. That is
it's very accurate. I mean, we always say like we believe in shipping internally, because if our internal team doesn't love it and use it, then like it's probably not ready for the main stage, because I do think that we are using Loom in a pretty robust manner.
awesome. As you look back at your career, what do you wish you did more of, and what do you wish you did less of?
I'm going to pivot that question because I try not to think in those. I think my like number one thing for college is like, I wish I had allowed myself to be like, just like more curious and more expansive. But in terms of my career, I don't think about it that way. I think one of my biggest learnings, especially earlier in my career, as I was getting like more and more opportunities, I think, I worked really hard, and I was also very lucky that I got opportunities and I made the most of those opportunities and I earned more opportunities. But I think there were times where I wasted energy feeling lucky rather than being like confident that I had earned those opportunities and also like returned that investment and that goodwill. And I think there is, especially earlier in your career, like a danger to spending time thinking about being lucky rather than just being fully present, right? Because when your worth is like wrapped up, when your success is wrapped up in luck versus worth, you're wondering whether that luck will run out, or if you need to consistently prove yourself. Rather, if you're confident in your worth, you're more open-minded, you're more grounded, you're more present. And so I wish I had been able to make that psychological shift earlier in my career.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it did. Bill asked here, how do you manage the far out areas so someone doesn't overtake you? I don't know what that means. I think
we're all company building, so like we're all invested in the same company. So like
exactly, everyone's on it for the same
company.
If somebody on the team wants to move the vision further and have ideas, I think ultimately openness is the biggest driver of growth. And Absolutely. You grow by adding, not by sort of gatekeeping, right? What are your top podcasts that you recommend, or any other resources that you stay current?
Oh yeah, I love you open my Spotify. I am a big podcast person. So the morning is definitely NPR and the Wall Street Journal. I used to like the Daily, but I don't love it as much anymore. I like Today Explained, Consider This. Let's see which other ones are great. I love the A16Z podcast as well. I think they have some really great stuff, specifically if you're stepping into like a VP of product role. They have a really great podcast on like hiring your first VP. But I do think in general, the A16 podcast is great. So those are some of my favorite. And then of course there's Planet Money, which is just like everyone's favorite.
And I think what Bill was referring to is, how do you manage far out areas so someone like Amazon is not taking you, or like Google doesn't step into your space? Like, how do you think about other people coming into the space?
I mean, competition is only going to make any product better, right? It's going to make you more aggressive, more curious. You're probably going to be willing to take on more risk and try to go faster. I think very few products are like winner takes all. And so though I absolutely try to stay aware of competitors and, learn from them, I'm pretty confident in Loom as a product, and also that our technology is really unique. And that while, someone may be new into video messaging, we've been at this for the last 5 years, and there's a lot of empathy we have for the creators and for people viewing and creating looms. Our role is to make sure we're making the most of that knowledge, both from like an empathy perspective and from a technology perspective.
Definitely. Ultimately, I think if you have a sticky product that customers love and want to use and keep coming back to, you're right. It's not a winner take all market. Most businesses are not. I mean, even look at something like accounting. There's like 300,000 accountants in North America, right?
Yep.
If everyone worried about like KPMG or PwC, they would probably never have a business.
Yep.
Awesome. What is the one tip you'd like to give as parting on the item of asynchronous communication that they can implement in their business right away?
We split between two. The first would be like, be intentional and clearly communicate how you want to use asynchronous communication, that like you want to start easy, right? Start by saying like, hey, all data I want to receive asynchronously, and then we can meet to discuss the data. And then the second one is, start using Loom. It's like definitely changed the way that I've worked and the way that my teams worked. And I think that there is something so incredibly human about the product and about receiving a video message.
Awesome, folks. I'm going to drop a link. It's info.loom.com/enterprise-video. If you're interested in learning more about Loom, sign up there. Thank you so much, Anique. It was a great pleasure. I learned a ton, and it's always a pleasure chatting with fellow product people.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day. Love and peace.